Hi everyone, welcome in this video. This is the part 3 of the promises series about the promises in JavaScript. In this one, I'm going to talk about the then, catch, and the finally methods in the promises. So let's head on to the presentation that I prepared for this one. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the then method. The then method holds two arguments. First for the fulfilled status of our promise, and the second for the rejected status of our promise. The then method always creates a new promise. So the first promise that we will pass before the then method, after then we will get a new promise with the new status and a new result, which will be whatever the result that we are specifying inside the then method. We can also omit the functions, the two arguments for the fulfilled status and the rejected status of the promise. We will not get any errors in the console log. We will only get the previous promise that was passed before the that then method, right? So the first example, as you can see, I'm just creating a promise. I'm resolving it with the number of the 10. I'm assigning the then method, which will basically return whatever the value was of the resolving promise. And the second argument, which is the second function, will be executed if the promise was rejected. But because in this example our promise is resolved, we will get the value of the promise, which is number 10. So here you can see our promise is of the status fulfilled and the result is number 10. All right. The next example, here you can see I'm creating a promise, which I'm rejecting it with a string of the oops. Then I'm assigning it to the then method, and I'm passing the first argument and the second argument. And again, the first argument will not be executed because our promise is of the status rejected. And so our second argument is being run. And so it returns the value of the reject method, which is the oops. So our promise is of the status fulfilled and the result is oops in this example, right? So the third one is the promise, which is getting rejected with a string of the oops. I'm assigning the then with the two arguments of undefined and undefined, which will not get any errors. In the console log, we'll only get the message of the uncounted promise, which is this one. All right. So as I said before, we can omit this two arguments or pass only one argument, which will be the first one for the resolved status of our function. So you can think of it if we would omit the second one, and our first promise will be rejected, then we will get the same result of the promise, because we are not catching the error. We are not handling it in the appropriate way, right? The then methods always can be chained as well. So the then method, as I said before, will always create a new promise with the value which was whatever the value of the result status of the rejected status of the promise. So let's take a look at the first example. Here again, I'm creating a promise which is getting resolved with the secret message. Then I'm assigning the first then method, which will be a function which console log our result of the resolved promise. And then as a return value, I'm adding a new string to our first string of the promise, which will be the result of the promise in the console log, right? So here I'm just chaining the second then, which returns the result from the first promise. So I'm not creating a new result, or I'm not catching an errors, because the first promise was of the promise of the status result. Right, so this is very simple. The second one, here again I'm creating a promise which gets resolved. Then I'm chaining the first then, which creates our new error, and it would show a new error with the string new error. And this line of code will create a new promise with the status of rejected, because we are getting a new error. And so because our status of the promise in this then method is of the status rejected, then our second then isn't being called, and so it gets omitted, and we're passing the value to the next one, which gets two arguments. The first is undefined for the resolved status of the promise, and the second one, which is for the rejected status of the promise, which we'll get from the first then. All right, so we will get the rejected status of the message, new error, and we are adding a message string to it. So we'll get the error with the new error message in the console log. So this is how we can chain then methods. Basically, you can chain however then methods you want, but I want to show you just the second two methods of the promises. The second one that I'm going to talk about is the catch method. So catch is a shorthand for the then method, but the mainly difference is that the catch method, the first argument of the catch method is undefined, so it will only get executed for the rejected status of the promise. So here in this example, you can see that I'm creating a promise which will get rejected with the string of the oops. Then I'm assigning the first then, which will return the value, which will be not executed in this example, because the first argument is only getting executed if the status of the promise that we are passing before then is of the status resolved. All right, so we are omitting this line of code, and we are getting to the second one when we are catching the error with the argument, with the function, which console log the error with whatever the value was that we are passing into the first promise. So here I'm just getting the error in the console with the string of the oops message. And so the promise in this example is of the status fulfilled, but the result is undefined because we are not returning anything from our catch method. All right. And the last method that I want to talk about is the finally method. The finally method doesn't receive any arguments to handle the values from the previous promise. It cannot handle the result of the rejected status result of the promise. The promise returned from finally holds the value from its previous promise. I know it sounds a bit complicated, but let me explain it on the example. Here I'm creating a new promise, which again gets rejected with a string of the oops. The second line is our then method, which returns whatever the value was of the resolved promise, but because our first promise was rejected, then this line of code gets omitted. Then we are going to the second line, which is the finally method, which outputs in the console log the text of I'm just passing the things down here. The last one, in the last one, we are catching the error. So whatever the error was, we are console logging the error with the text of the oops in the console log. And so in the console log, we'll see that our first line is the finally method, which doesn't take the value of the promise that we have passed in at the very top, right? And the last line in the console log will be the message, which we are catching in the catch method. So the finally method, again, it doesn't handle the resolve of the rejected status of the promise. It only it can only output some message, or basically it will be executed every time, no matter what the status was of the promise. So let's take a look at the last example that I prepared here. Here I'm creating a promise which gets rejected again with a string of you shall not pass. Then I'm assigning the then value, which outputs the value. Then I'm catching the error, which with whatever the error was. And then finally I'm console logging the text of oof, almost done. And so again, in the console log, I'm getting the first line, which is the you shall not pass, because I'm catching the error before I'm passing the finally method. So this line of code gets omitted again because the promise is getting rejected. The second one outputs the error, and the first one, the third one, the last one is the finally method, which will be executed no matter what, and we'll get the oof all done message in the console log. So this promise is of status fulfilled, and the result is undefined because we are not returning any value from this promise chain. All right, so this was a lot of information, but if you have again any questions or any ideas for more videos, then leave it please in the comment section, and I will see you next time. Bye.